You made it back to scented streets. Tonight, Paris smells like roses and rain. Let's start the video. Stay until end to have a thrilling experience.
Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the elegant cobblestone veins of 19th century Paris. But no, not the Paris of baguettes, barrettes, and charming accordion solos. But before that, 20th September is my birthday. Can we hit 5,000 subscribers? I know we can. Please subscribe if you genuinely liked this type of content. So let's start. You're arriving just after a light morning rain, walking slowly along a quiet boulevard that smells not of rot or sewage or muddy horse prints, but of violets. A sweet, powdery scent drifts lazily from the gutters. Beneath your boots, water trickles through the cracks in the pavement. It's not just water. It's perfumed water. Welcome to the city that tried to scrub away its sins with rosewater and lemon balm. Now, you probably wouldn't survive 5 minutes here without a fan to wave the odors off your face, or an entire vial of smelling salts, because while the perfumes were very real, so were the problems they were masking. Rats the size of baguettes, public urinals that overflowed in the summer, a sewer system with more drama than a royal court. And yet, there was something almost whimsical in the way Paris approached it all. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where are you tuning in from tonight? What's the time where you are? Drop it in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The streets of Paris in the early 1800s are not romantic yet. They are chaotic, loud, disheveled, smelling more of stable than salon. You shuffle down the Rue Saint-Honoré and dodge a pair of wooden carts overflowing with cabbage, soggy rags, and the occasional chicken feather. A man with a long broom sloshes something across the gutter, and it splashes perilously close to your boots. He scowls, probably because he's just realized that his bucket is half full of something that is definitely not just water. The thing is, Paris in the early 19th century was filthy. There's no cute way to say it, and not just the kind of messy that makes you go, ew. This was the kind of city where public health was considered more a theoretical ideal than a municipal responsibility. Waste disposal? Optional. Open sewers? Mandatory. Chamber pots? Ubiquitous. The infamous phrase, le tout à l'égout, literally everything into the sewer, wasn't even fully embraced until much later in the century. And then there was the scent. Oh, the scent. Imagine a hot summer's day, no breeze, narrow streets crowded with livestock, sweaty pedestrians, and the leftovers of yesterday's market fish. Historians still argue whether the Parisian perfume industry truly blossomed because of love for fragrance or because they were just trying to survive the stench. But things were about to shift, and like all great urban overhauls, it would start not with politicians, but with public pressure. Not the good kind, the olfactory kind. You pass a bakery, and for a moment, you get a whiff of something good. Yeast, sugar, maybe almonds. And then, bam, a sudden gust of wind carries a bouquet of horse dung and spoiled milk into your face like a slap with a soggy doily. You're not alone in this assault. Entire social movements of the time were built around the concept of miasma, the belief that disease came from bad smells, floating invisibly through the air like malevolent spirits with terrible hygiene. Doctors, novelists, and political theorists alike began to link cleanliness with civility. Odor became morality. If your street stank, maybe you stank. And if you stank, well, maybe you didn't deserve to live in the heart of the world's most refined city. Entire neighborhoods were judged and sometimes demolished based on how offensive their smells were. This wasn't urban planning, it was urban shaming. The turning point came when urban reformers realized something strange. People didn't mind the idea of street cleaning, but they were resistant to the water alone. It was too industrial, too harsh, too unsympathetic. What they wanted was a spectacle, something gentle, beautiful, even luxurious. And thus emerged the idea of perfumed water. Not to drink, not to bathe in, but to pour directly into the gutters, through nozzles and fountains, spritzed out in elegant little arcs that shimmered in the sun. Lavender for the right bank, neroli for the left, violets for the gardens, peppermint near the meat market, because, well, peppermint had a tough job. Of course, this wasn't just about smell. It was theater. The idea of a city that looked like it was trying, a Paris that wore its good intentions like a dab of cologne behind each ear. Because in a world where so much of daily life smelled bad, spraying the streets with perfume wasn't just symbolic, it was strategic. It said, we're better than this, we're cleaner than this, we are modern. And as you stroll past the uniformed street washer gently flicking bergamot-scented water across a curb, you realize this may be the most charming example of urban passive aggression you've ever seen. You don't clean the streets because you have to, you clean them because your enemies are watching.
The charm of the scented boulevards, however, becomes all the more dazzling when you understand just how utterly revolting Paris used to be. You might think modern city grime is bad, maybe the subway smells like wet dog or last Thursday's garlic naan, but nothing, and I mean nothing, compares to the sensory onslaught that was pre-renovation Paris. So here you are, ducking under a low archway in the Marais, careful not to step in, well, anything. Because before there were underground sewers, there were rues de l'égout, gutters that snaked down the center of the street, open and unapologetic. You and the waste shared the same walking path. Horse droppings, household slop, spoiled food, and occasionally human waste, all swept toward the Seine by the occasional rain or broom-wielding worker with the optimism of a man in denial. On warm days, the air thickened. It clung to your skin. The famous perfumes of the city didn't come in bottles yet. They hung in the alleyways in powerful, pungent plumes of decay. You inhale and instantly regret it. But that's the thing. 19th century Parisians didn't have a choice. This was their air. No apps to check pollution levels, just your nose and the hope that someone down the block had thrown out something relatively neutral smelling. And the waste wasn't just in the streets. It was underfoot, in the homes, embedded in the infrastructure. Cesspools were common, brick-lined pits dug into courtyards slowly filling with household waste. When they overflowed, which was, let's be honest, often, they leaked into basements, walls, even wells. You imagine sitting at a dinner table while the floorboards squish ever so slightly with... Let's not finish that thought. What's more, every building had its own setup, which meant there was no consistent system. Some had rudimentary pipes that connected nowhere, others had the dreaded fosse fixe, a fixed cesspit that was only emptied when someone paid for it. And given the cost, most people simply didn't. A fringe but believable rumor even claimed one building exploded when a trapped gas pocket ignited during dinner. Historians still argue whether this tale was exaggerated to push sanitation reform or if it actually happened. But the moral remains. Methane plus bourgeois interiors equals a very bad time. Now, imagine you're a poor worker living on the 6th floor of a walk-up and you need to dispose of something unpleasant. Carrying it downstairs? Unlikely. So instead, you open the window and yell the infamous warning, Gare à l'eau, which literally means, watch out for the water. Then, splash. Down it goes. That romantic courtyard view? It's a health hazard. Sidewalk umbrellas? Not always for the rain. And it gets better, or worse. Parisian streets were paved with uneven stones that trapped filth between them. Rats flourished.
Fleas threw nightly raves in your socks. Milkmen mixed in chalk. Bread sellers used spoiled flour. Water was fetched from the Seine itself, which doubled as both a water source and a sewer. A loop you don't want to complete. So yes, when officials started discussing perfumed water as a solution, some laughed, others sobbed, and a few leaned all the way in, dousing boulevards in rose-scented floods like they were baptizing the sins of the past. But before the scent came, the push for real change. Paris had to confront just how deeply embedded its filth problem was, and it wasn't just physical, it was social. The rich often blamed the poor for the city's smell, conveniently forgetting that it was usually their policies that made proper sanitation unaffordable. Meanwhile, writers like Victor Hugo were out here describingly miserable in olfactory terms. In his world, moral decay and street decay were intertwined. Then came the public health reports. Early 19th century doctors began to publish alarming studies linking odor to disease, claiming that cholera and typhoid were caused by miasms, foul vapors that seeped into the lungs and corrupted the blood. While modern science has, moved on, at the time this was cutting edge. And if disease could be blamed on stench, then clearly the solution was to make the air smell good, right? Enter civic pride in a bottle. Suddenly, a clean-smelling city wasn't just pleasant, it was patriotic, it was moral. To be a citizen of Paris was to have a nose refined enough to reject the stink and demand roses. And thus the stage was set. Reforms were coming. Streets would be widened, sewers would be reimagined, and yes, eventually, public fountains would hiss out clouds of minty mist just because someone thought it might make people behave better. You pause at a crossroads where 5 different alleys intersect. The air smells faintly of laundry soap, mildew, and croissants. Not bad, all things considered. But in the corner, a man sloshes a wooden pail of something questionable into a drain. He whistles as he does it. You take a step back. In just a few decades, this scene will change. The man will be gone, the drain will be connected to an underground sewer, and instead of sloshing out rot, a city worker will arrive with a hose, spraying water scented with heliotrope and crushed mint across the same stones. Same corner, entirely different sensory experience. But for now, you keep walking, carefully.
As you continue through the musty arteries of 19th century Paris, sidestepping the occasional pile of something that wasn't there a minute ago, your nose crinkles, but not just from the smell. It's the sheer contradiction of it all. How could the city that gave the world Chanel No. 5 also be the same place where streets regularly reeked like a compost heap wearing boots? Well, believe it or not, it was the noses that started the revolution. Enter the era's most unlikely urban heroes, the doctors, philosophers, and oddly enough, fashionable socialites who were sick, literally and figuratively, of the stench. These were people who didn't just wrinkle their noses. They wrote angry pamphlets about it. One especially vocal reformer, Dr. Jean-Baptiste Fonsgrive, described the streets of Paris as a giant olfactory prison, which is a poetic way of saying it stank and it was everyone's problem. But even more influential were the writers and thinkers. Balzac once described the Rue Coquelier as smelling of the sins of the stomach, which, to be honest, sounds like a cologne designed by Satan. And yet, these dramatic descriptors were what got the public's attention. If you can make a smell sound literary, it becomes harder to ignore. Meanwhile, fashionable Parisians began carrying not just perfumes, but scented handkerchiefs soaked in vinegar to combat the air quality. Think of it as the 1800s version of wearing a mask. And it wasn't just for show. Many believe these perfumed cloths actually protected against disease, since they filtered out the miasmas. Science has since labeled this adorably wrong, but at the time, it made perfect sense. As more people began to believe that bad smells equaled bad health, and that good smells therefore promoted vitality, the pressure mounted. Paris needed to clean up. Not just physically, but aesthetically. Not just cleaner, prettier, smellier, in the right way. That's when the city started taking things seriously. Meetings were held, reports commissioned, charts drawn up tracking where the stink was worst and when. Enter the hygiene societies. Groups of respectable citizens who took it upon themselves to walk around Paris making notes like, smells faintly of boiled socks near the fish market, 7 out of 10 intensity. Historians still argue whether these sniff patrols were truly effective or more of a theatrical gesture, but they existed. Imagine being paid to rate stenches, somewhere between a wine taster and a disaster inspector. And it wasn't just the wealthy calling the shots. Some early social critics, particularly women writers like Flora Tristan, noted that access to clean air and water was a basic human right, not just a luxury for the upper classes. Clean streets meant safer, healthier lives, especially for the working poor. The problem was you couldn't exactly bottle equality and spray it into the gutters, though Lord knows Paris was about to try. So as you stroll past the flower stall, real or imagined, you start to notice the shift. The streets, though still uneven and far from sterile, are being eyed not as problems, but as canvases. Places where hygiene meets art. Where reform wears a powdered wig and spritzes itself with bergamot before speaking at city council meetings. And yet, the science behind all this was murky at best. While some physicians argued convincingly for structured sanitation, others continued to insist that merely changing the smell of a place would prevent illness. You start to realize that much of the scented reform movement was a strange cocktail of half-truths, aesthetics, and class performance. Perfume wasn't just about masking odor. It became a statement of intent. It said, we are trying. We are modern. We are not animals in a barn. There was even an idea floated in one pamphlet that every Parisian should be required to wear a fragrant badge, refreshed daily, to help improve the smell of the whole city. The plan, thankfully, did not pass. Still, the city leaned further into the scented approach. Political speeches mentioned restoring Paris to the garden she once was. Garden metaphors were everywhere. You couldn't walk 10 feet without someone declaring, the city will blossom anew, like a daisy rising from manure. And poetically speaking, Paris did begin to change. Imagine passing a city worker, not a grizzled laborer in a stained tunic, but a uniformed man with clean boots and a brass nozzle spraying not just water, but fragrance along the curb. A gentle mist of lilac or lavender hissing softly in the morning sun. That was the dream. A cleaner, softer city where you could breathe in deeply and not immediately regret it. You smile as you pass a newspaper stand and see headlines celebrating the scent-escaping efforts. Some scoffed, of course. Satirists took a field day. One paper joked that the city's officials were more concerned with floral illusions than actual sewage. But still, there was something charming, even hopeful, in the idea that smell could be civilization's front line, a nose-first defense against decay. And so, as the century progressed and the noses kept sniffing, the perfume kept flowing. You pass a row of carriages clattering over the cobblestones, their wheels sending muddy droplets toward the sidewalk. The scent in the air now was unfamiliar, something citrusy, clean, not at all what you'd expect from a city known more for absinthe than antiseptic. That's when you hear the name whispered by a passing clerk in a dusty waistcoat, nodding toward a man surveying the gutter with curious reverence. Belgrand. You've never seen someone admire a sewer before, but Eugene Belgrand isn't just anyone. He's the visionary behind Paris's subterranean transformation, a man who looked at foul runoff and saw symmetry, A civil engineer by trade, Belgrand was the kind of person who believed geometry could solve just about anything, including the smell of a city. And perhaps in some roundabout way, he was right. Before Belgrand's work, the Parisian sewer system was less system and more chaotic noodle soup of misery. Pipes were misaligned, drainage was inconsistent, water pressure, a myth. Waste would often flow uphill, due to poorly calculated gradients. Belgrand didn't just want to clean the streets, he wanted to elevate the city's very plumbing to the level of art. Under his guidance and with the backing of Baron Haussmann's grand urban overhaul, Paris began to dig and dig and dig some more. A vast underground world took shape, carefully engineered with vaulted tunnels, wide passageways, and consistent slopes that let gravity do the heavy lifting. Today, you might take flush toilets for granted. Back then, people were stunned. Rumors circulated that the new sewer pipes were so precise, a marble dropped in one end would roll through to the Seine without hesitation. Historians still debate whether this was clever PR or brilliant engineering. Probably both. But Belgrand didn't stop there. No, he wanted these sewers to be beautiful. That's right. Ornate brickwork, elegant arches, even signage. Imagine a dungeon that smells of lilac and also helpfully tells you which way the Louvre is. There's something wonderfully French about that. Above ground, his ideas changed everything. Buildings were redesigned with standardized plumbing. Drainage flowed downward instead of sideways. The streets were regraded to ensure water and perfume could be flushed through efficiently. Belgrand wasn't just making a city livable, he was making it scentable. And scentable it became. Now picture this. It's 6 a.m. You, a sleepy Parisian baker, unlock your shop to find the streets still damp from the early morning rinse. But instead of that sour, fetid scent you used to associate with the gutters, there's a faint trace of lemon verbena in the air. The smell is so subtle you almost wonder if you imagined it. But then the next wave hits. Rosewater, lightly layered with something woody. Cedar? You don't know. You're just grateful it's not fish bones and regret. This was all part of Belgrand's silent vision. He knew that hygiene, real hygiene, didn't have to be ugly. In fact, the more elegant it felt, the more likely people were to respect it. Perfumed water wasn't just about masking smell, it was about setting a tone. Like lighting candles in a room you just tidied. It sends a message. We care. We tried. You pass by one of the city's newer fountains, its ironwork gleaming in the pale light. At its base, a bronze cherub smiles forever. It's not a drinking fountain. It's for the streets. A perfumed water dispenser, one of many that dot the new boulevards. They don't just rinse, they aromatize. And all of this entire aesthetic of cleanliness, is thanks to the man who loves sewers more than most love sunsets. Of course, not everyone appreciated Belgrand's ambitions. Critics accused the city of prioritizing style over substance. They questioned the cost. They claimed, perhaps fairly, that spraying lavender on dung was more distraction than solution. But even so, Belgrand's vision held. Paris needed hope, not just hygiene. And in that hope was perfume. There's something oddly touching about it. You don't often think of engineers as artists, yet here was a man so committed to dignity in design that he transformed the city's bowels into cathedrals of cleanliness. And because of him, the very idea of a clean street in Paris evolved from a muddy hope to a misty floral reality. As you continue your stroll, the scent of citrus fades, replaced by something muskier, perhaps vetiver. The morning has begun. Horse hooves echo between buildings. A paper boy shouts the headlines. A milk cart rumbles past. And somewhere beneath it all, below your feet, the carefully angled sewers of Belgrand hum their quiet, fragrant song. You follow a wide boulevard that gleams with damp cobblestones. A light mist still clings to the air, as if the city has just stepped out of a bath and dabbed herself with cologne. But behind this gentle sensory trick lies an absurdly complex and surprisingly poetic machine. You're about to meet the pipes, the pumps, and, believe it or not, the perfume nozzles. Yes, nozzles, specifically designed to spritz the streets with fragrant water. Because if you're going to sanitize a metropolis, you might as well make it smell like bergamot while you're at it. The infrastructure behind this scented spectacle was no small feat. Picture a sprawling network of aqueducts, underground cisterns, and iron valves, all rerouted or rebuilt to accommodate the city's thirst, not just for clean water, but for pleasantly scented clean water. It started with the creation of new reservoirs outside Paris, particularly in the hills near Montmartre and Belleville. Gravity, that ever-patient workhorse, helped channel water down into distribution points throughout the city. And then came the trucks. Not garbage trucks. These were the Aerocies Perfumed, scented sprinklers. Horse-drawn and bizarrely elegant, they rumbled through the dawn streets, carrying enormous tanks of water infused with floral oils, citrus peels, and occasionally vinegar tinctures for the antiseptic snap. A fringe but delightfully persistent rumor claims that one truck broke down near Liss Halls, releasing a burst of lilac-infused vapor that caused spontaneous applause from nearby grocers. Historians still argue whether that happened or if it was just very good branding by the Sanitation Bureau. You imagine one of these carts approaching now, its wheels squeaking slightly, the smell of orange blossoms announcing it long before it rounds the corner. The nozzle attached at the rear releases a gentle arc of mist that sparkles briefly in the morning sun before settling into the cracks of the stone. It's not for you. It's for the city itself, like putting perfume on your pillow so your dreams smell better. But here's where it gets even more whimsical. The city didn't just randomly douse the streets in whichever scent was cheapest that week. Oh no, there was strategy. The selection of scents was surprisingly deliberate, even seasonal. Mint and eucalyptus were popular in the hot summer months. Not just because they were refreshing, but because they helped mask the meat market's aggressively biological contributions to the air. In the cooler months, heavier scents like sandalwood or patchouli were used, comforting, grounding, and allegedly good for keeping the cholera away. Did it actually work? Debatable, but it smelled like it worked, and that was apparently good enough. In more elite neighborhoods, rose and violet were the favorites, dainty, socially aspirational, and symbolic of refinement. Imagine the city equivalent of, "This smells like old money." Meanwhile, near the more industrial quarters, stronger, acidic fragrances were used to combat the constant onslaught of smoke, soot, and fish guts. There was even a brief, dazzling moment where a clove-cinnamon blend was trialed during the winter holidays, giving entire streets the aroma of freshly baked pain de pies. Naturally, it caused chaos at nearby bakeries. At the heart of this olfactory choreography was the sanitation department's scent master, an official role filled, allegedly, by a former apothecary with an overactive imagination and a deep hatred of cabbage. His records remain partial, but fragments suggest he took his job very seriously, sometimes testing scent ratios himself by crouching over street vents in a three-piece suit, muttering things like "too lemony" into a leather notebook. It wasn't just about masking bad smells. The perfumed water also carried symbolic weight. It showed that Paris was not only modern, it was benevolent, a place that would go out of its way to make sure even the poorest streets got their weekly jasmine rinse. Whether it actually made things cleaner is a different story. But people noticed. Tourists remarked on it. Newspapers printed scent schedules. And citizens began to treat their streets not as filthy battlefields, but something closer to living rooms. The pumps, many powered by steam or horse-operated cranks, became attractions in themselves. Children would follow the carts, elders would wave, and every now and then, someone would get caught in a mist cloud, only to emerge smelling faintly of geranium and municipal ambition. Of course, problems arose. The pumps had to be refilled constantly, essential oils weren't cheap, and some scents clashed with their environment. Lavender near the tanneries? A war crime. One city council member once compared the combined smell of lilac and tripe to death in a bonnet. But despite these hiccups, the city pressed on. Because infrastructure, when draped in petals and citrus, somehow felt more intimate, less mechanical. You weren't just managing a population, you were wooing it. So you keep walking past another misted corner. The air is still damp, but this time there's a hint of something almondy, subtle, sweet. It lingers like a memory of cake. You close your eyes. For a moment, the city doesn't smell like a city at all.
You turn a corner and find yourself on a narrow side street, the kind where the buildings lean inward like they're sharing gossip over the cobbles. This was once the Paris few outsiders saw, clogged with merchants, laborers, washerwomen, and every imaginable smell under the sun. And yet here, too, the perfume flowed, but not always as planned. See, the scented street water may have started as a top-down initiative, but like all things Parisian, it quickly became tangled in class tensions, civic pride, and just a sprinkle of passive aggression. On paper, perfumed water was democratic. Every arrondissement received its dose, and sanitation reports were written in the neutral, antiseptic tone of bureaucracy. But in practice, the distribution map looked a lot like a wealth heat map. Fancy neighborhoods, especially around the Palais Royal and Champs-Élysées, got regular spritzes of rose and heliotrope. Meanwhile, working-class districts? A bit of lemon water, if the truck remembered them at all. These women knew the scent schedule better than the officials did. One particularly vocal flower seller from Montparnasse even wrote a sarcastic letter to a local paper asking why her cart smelt like onions when the street next to hers smelt like paradise. Historians still argue whether these grievances had any measurable effect on policy, but many believe they contributed to the eventual standardization of the perfume program. It became a matter of national dignity to ensure no street smelled too much worse than another, or at least that the illusion of fairness was maintained. Yet the inequalities weren't just olfactory. In poorer districts, water access itself remained a daily challenge. While the wealthy had indoor plumbing and private fountains, working-class Parisians queued at public taps, sometimes for hours just to fill a bucket. Perfumed water was to them a bizarre luxury. Imagine waiting in line for your daily water ration while a government cart sprays jasmine on the curb. It stings a bit. Still, there was something undeniably powerful in the gesture. Perfume became a kind of symbolic apology from the city to its people, a promise that even if your wages were low and your rent outrageous, at least your street didn't smell like moldy cheese and failure. And the people responded. Local communities began taking pride in the scent of their neighborhoods. Some even pulled funds to buy extra fragrant oil for their Arosa's roots. Others took to DIY methods, herbs stuffed into gutters, sachets tied to street lamps, even citrus peels scattered along the curb. It was urban pride, one sniff at a time. Then came the sniff riots. Yes, you heard that right.
In the spring of 1869, a miscommunication between municipal scent crews led to the sudden switch from lilac to pine oil in several high-end districts. The result? Outrage. Women fainted. Letters poured into City Hall. One angry socialite was quoted as saying the city now smelled like a lumberjack's laundry. Temporary protests formed, complete with signs reading, "Bring back the bloom." City officials quickly reversed the decision. Lilac was reinstated, apologies were made, and the scent master was, allegedly, forced to publicly explain himself. And in true Parisian form, the incident became a short-lived fashion trend, Bois Brut, a cologne inspired by the chaos. Meanwhile, the working class watched in amused silence. Their scent hadn't changed in months. Probably never would, but they smelled rebellion in the air, and that was perfume enough. Over time, something remarkable happened. Perfumed water ceased being a novelty and became a quiet expectation. It was like streetlights or bread, something that should always be there, subtle and unnoticed until it was missing. Visitors to the city began commenting on how pleasant Paris smelled, not in a flashy way, but in a "was that lavender just now?" kind of way. For the first time in centuries, the idea of a pleasant-smelling city wasn't a punchline, it was a brand. And Paris leaned into it with the casual confidence of a woman wearing too much Chanel No. 5, but somehow making it work. You walk on, passing a bakery with its windows fogged from the morning batch. A breeze carries a blend of fresh bread, city perfume, and just faintly, the unmistakable scent of someone sweeping the curb with rosewater. It's ridiculous. It's poetic. It's Paris.
Now you find yourself standing at the edge of Paris's grand boulevards, that familiar morning shimmer still hanging low over the stones. The air smells faintly of citrus and maybe chamomile. You inhale deeply, and for a moment, you forget that underneath these orderly streets lies an ever-murmuring sewer. But your reverie is cut short by a sudden clatter. A sanitation crew pulling around the corner, hauling their familiar tank, its nozzle gleaming like a cannon of cleanliness. What you're witnessing isn't just morning maintenance, it's ceremony. Because by the 1870s, perfuming Paris had become performance art, part engineering, part civic theater, and part psychological warfare against filth. And the main stage? The wide, airy boulevards masterminded by Baron Haussmann himself. Remember him? Napoleon III's favorite architect of change, the man who gutted and reshaped medieval Paris like an overgrown bonsai tree. Haussmann's redesign wasn't just about aesthetics, it was a strategy. He widened roads to allow better airflow, improved sunlight penetration, and, most importantly, made it easier to hose everything down. Gone were the dark, twisted alleyways that held smells hostage. In came the long, elegant avenues that invited wind to do its part, and left plenty of room for the Arosusas parfumés to do theirs. But what Haussmann may not have predicted was how deeply ritualized the scenting process would become. The early morning spray became something people relied on, like a rooster crowing or the bells of Notre Dame. If the scent truck was late, people noticed. If the smell changed, people speculated. There were rumors that the morning scent could predict weather changes. Lavender meant clear skies, rosewater meant rain. Never confirmed, of course, but whispered all the same. And the workers? They weren't just seen as janitors anymore. They were city florists, in a sense. Cloaked in navy uniforms with brass buttons, they handled the nozzles like conductors wielding batons. Some even claim they developed a signature spray style, a flourish here, a double pass there. Their job was equal parts sanitation and ambiance management. You picture one now. A man in his 50s, sleeves rolled, brows furrowed in focus. He's misting the curb with orange blossom water, giving a little nod to a passing shopkeeper who promptly offers him a free croissant. Because he's not just cleaning the streets, he's setting the mood. And the mood mattered. The perfumed spray became for some a measure of municipal affection. A freshly scented street meant the city cared about you, that someone somewhere had decided you deserved bergamot today instead of just plain water. In working-class neighborhoods, this mattered a lot. When the scented trucks began arriving regularly in the Marais and Belleville, editorials popped up praising the city's moral hygiene, not just its physical upkeep. Historians still argue whether this shift in tone was sincere civic pride or a clever distraction from deeper inequalities. But the fact remains, the scent ritual worked. Paris started to smell better. Not perfect, not sterile, but better. And better in this case was revolutionary. It also gave rise to a kind of smell-based geography. Locals began identifying neighborhoods not just by name, but by scent. Ah, the Rue des Martyrs. That's the one with the peppermint undertone. Or, you're in Passy? They do bergamot now. Used to be vanilla, but someone complained. You chuckle at how absurdly specific this became. Some Parisians could allegedly tell the time based on the changing scent patterns as the trucks made their way through the arrondissements. But with routine comes rebellion. Artists, especially the bohemians of Montmartre, started mocking the whole scented spectacle. Satirical cartoons showed giant perfume sprayers replacing public statues. A play titled Léo de Bureaucratie featured a love affair between a perfume sprayer and a sewer inspector. One particularly dramatic protester even dumped raw garlic cloves into a misting tank to protest the city's spending priorities. The resulting cloud cleared an entire street. Garlic won that round. But even the critics admitted, grudgingly, that the perfumed streets had become part of the city's identity. Guidebooks from the 1880s advised tourists to rise early and enjoy the fragrant tranquility of Paris before the rush of the day. A few even suggested following the scented trucks on foot, as if tailing a gentle parade. That's dedication. Back on your boulevard, the crew finishes their pass. A faint mist clings to the lampposts and railings, catching the early light in a way that feels almost magical. The scent lingers for just a moment more before the city's busier smells begin to crowd back in. Coffee, tobacco, fresh bread, wet cobblestones, distant chatter. But for that brief, fragrant interlude, Paris wasn't just clean. It was intentional, romantic. Scented, yes, but also tender. And just like that, the ritual is done. Until tomorrow.
You're starting to realize that Paris, by the late 19th century, wasn't just spritzing for hygiene, it was marketing itself by aroma. And that leads us to a deliciously weird turn in the story, the tourism of scent. Because once word got out that the streets of Paris didn't reek of rot and horse droppings, but instead offered a refreshing breeze of lemon balm or verbena, the city became the scented capital of Europe. And tourists came not just to see the Eiffel Tower, but to smell Boulevard Number 5. Travel writers waxed poetic about the scented boulevards. American ladies freshly landed at Gare du Nord would gasp in delighted disbelief. It smells like a garden. Travel journals from this time begin to read less like city guides and more like perfume labels. The lower Latin Quarter features a lilac-forward base with musk undertones. One German novelist claimed the Rue de Vaugirard gave him a nose ache of joy. Hotels got in on the game. If your establishment didn't offer some version of street view with mist, you were yesterday's baguette. Some hoteliers even began adding their own scents to the sidewalks just outside their doors. Peppermint in the winter, vanilla in the spring. It was like putting your hotel logo in the air. Naturally, lawsuits followed. Historians still argue whether the rise in scented tourism actually improved Paris's economy or just created a massive placebo effect for wealthier visitors. But it's undeniable, scent had become soft power. A way for the city to charm your senses before you even reach the bakery. And it did. Enterprising perfume houses began creating city scent souvenirs. Little glass vials labeled with names like Rue Saint Honoré Mist and Dawn on the Seine. Were they accurate representations of street spray blends? Absolutely not. Did people care? Absolutely also not. One British aristocrat was said to carry a handkerchief soaked in Place des Vosges fog to combat homesickness. That's some real nose-based nostalgia. Back on the street, you pass a perfumery with samples on display. A little chalkboard lists today's urban notes. Germanium, oak moss, and was that black pepper? You wonder if this one was inspired by the meat stalls near Les Halles. Not everything can smell like a dream. Some days the city just smells interesting. Of course, this global fascination came with growing pains. Some cities tried to copy Paris's scented strategy, with mixed results. London tried rosewater. It clashed spectacularly with the Thames. Naples attempted citrus-infused cobble sprays, but the cost of importing orange oil sent the city council into an economic tailspin. Vienna briefly experimented with powdered lilac launched from rooftop cannons. That ended predictably badly. Meanwhile, Paris doubled down. By the 1990s, scent had become part of urban diplomacy. Foreign dignitaries were given perfumed walking routes. One Ottoman ambassador reportedly demanded a personal misting crew as part of his visit itinerary. A Russian ballerina declared, "Paris smells like the inside of a letter from a lover," which honestly is better branding than anything money could buy. And just as scent became Paris's calling card abroad, it also became a mirror within. Artists began painting scent. Poets began writing scent. One moody essayist described a foggy street as bergamot-colored. Another compared an argument with a lover to the sudden sourness when the Rue Mouffetard forgets its lavender. The city's olfactory identity had warmed its way into the creative bloodstream. You find yourself now in the shadow of the Opera Garnier. Even here, a light scent hangs in the air. Powdery, a bit floral, like someone recently twirled past wearing too much iris cologne. It's hard to tell whether that's intentional or just the city being itself. And you think, is there any other place where mist is a civic personality trait? But as always, reality lurks beneath the romance. The scented system had its limitations. The essential oils sometimes gummed up the spray nozzles. Heat waves overwhelmed the perfumed water's powers. And then there were the political shakeups. New governments with new budgets that didn't always see the value in spending francs on eau de jasmine for gutters. Yet every time the city tried to stop, people noticed. Letters flooded in, protests erupted, petitions circulated demanding the return of civility scent. Some blamed the lack of perfume for rising crime. Others said it made the bread taste worse. Absurd, entirely, but it shows just how tightly scent had wound itself into the public's expectations. And honestly, who could blame them? Because when a city goes out of its way to smell nice just for you, you start to care about it. You lift your chin when you walk. You wave at the mist crew. You tell your cousin back in Lyon that yes, Paris smells like heaven if heaven had cobblestones. You keep walking. A soft wind nudges a new smell your way. Maybe something earthy and citrusy, maybe a touch of chamomile again. Someone nearby exhales, That's it. No need for adjectives. Just, The city has done its job. The scent trails begin to blur now, softening into one another like colors in a watercolor wash. That citrusy zing from before, it's giving way to something duskier, maybe patchouli, Maybe just the damp musk of a city slowly exhaling. You turn down a smaller street, and the mood changes, quieter, more personal. It's here that the psychology of scent comes into focus. Because for 19th century Parisians, this wasn't just a matter of sanitation or civic image anymore. Scent had become emotional infrastructure, a way to feel calm, clean, proud, or even nostalgic. Let's start with the basics. Science already tells us that smell is the most memory-triggering of the senses. One whiff and you're 5 years old again, stealing fruit tarts off a windowsill. Paris knew this instinctively long before neuroscience caught up. By scenting its streets, it created a kind of public emotional memory, a shared olfactory language that meant home for millions. Historians still argue whether this was intentional municipal psychology or just an accidental byproduct of flower-happy sanitation workers. But the effect was profound. Streets stopped being just places to walk. They became mood spaces. Entire neighborhoods developed reputations based on how they smelled. The Marais? Relaxed and floral. The Bastille? Zingy with a bite. Montmartre? Spicy, like someone's eccentric aunt's attic. A walk through the city became a walk through your own brain. You passed from calm to energized to sleepy and back again, depending on which blend of mist you were strolling through. And once you started associating feelings with fragrance, the scent trucks became something more than tools. They became caretakers. You can picture the morning ritual now. You, rising from your creaky bed in the 5th floor flat, lacing your boots, opening the shutters, and there it is. The faint sparkle of mist against the cobbles, the whisper of lavender or basil. And just like that, the day feels doable. There's even documentation, charmingly obsessive documentation, of how people used scent to anger their emotions. One woman kept a scent diary, rating her mood against the day's boulevard aroma. Rosewater plus blue sky equals 10 out of 10. Mint plus rain, too melancholy. A certain school teacher in the 1870s reportedly timed his lectures to coincide with when the nearby street got its afternoon citrus rinse. His students were calmer, he claimed, when the air smelled like lemonade and discipline. Of course, it wasn't always pleasant. Overly pungent days could ruin moods just as fast. There were reports of lavender-induced migraines. Too much time allegedly caused fainting spells in entire districts. But even the bad days reinforced the pattern. Scent was powerful. It moved people. The authorities began taking this seriously. A short-lived initiative in the 1880s saw scent psychologists, yes, that was a thing, consulted on neighborhood profiles. Should Rue Claire feel comforting? Should Boulevard Voltaire stimulate creativity? It was like urban feng shui, but with basil oil. One particularly odd experiment tried to reduce crime using scent. Law enforcement in one arrondissement introduced nightly sprays of ylang-ylang and sandalwood, believing that a city at peace will smell like peace. Did it work? Well, crime didn't go up, so that's something. And in households, the effects trickled in too. People began mimicking street scents indoors. Entire trends formed around matching your home to your neighborhood's signature aroma. One guide recommended blending a sprig of rosemary and lemon peel for those living near the Luxembourg Gardens to harmonize with your external environment. Urban harmony, one noseful at a time. You pass a flower stand now. A little card next to the violets reads, "Same blend used in Rue de Rennes mornings." People are bottling street identity, capturing it, naming it, not just for tourists, but for themselves. It's oddly touching. You're beginning to realize that this wasn't just a city trying to smell better. It was a city trying to feel better. And it was doing it with invisible tools. No bricks, no banners, just scent and time. And what happens when you smell something familiar every day in the same place? It becomes part of you, like the ticking of your apartment's old clock or the way the sign whispers under the bridges. You stop noticing it only because it's nestled so perfectly inside your expectations. You stop at a corner cafe. The waiter nods and sets down a small coffee without asking. The scent of toasted beans collides gently with the faint floral echo still drifting from the street. You take a sip, close your eyes. The city smells like memory. And not just your memory. Because this isn't just about you. This is about the millions who built their lives around these scents, who found comfort, identity, even hope in the morning mist. Workers, lovers, children, poets, all walking different paths but breathing the same breeze. A communal inhale. Scent as glue, as timekeeper, as therapy. You smile. The cat jumps into your lap. Somewhere in the distance, the faint hiss of another misting truck, another pass, another emotional recalibration for the block. You don't even need to see it. You just know. The city has exhaled again.
You're not even surprised anymore when the morning mist smells a little like orange peel and old books. It's become a daily mystery. What will today's Paris choose to feel like? But as comforting as this all is, it's time we follow the scent trails somewhere slightly less poetic, into the bureaucratic maze that actually made it all happen. Because Perfumed's streets don't just spray themselves. Behind every soft spritz of lavender on cobblestones was a paper trail thicker than a baguette. Municipal scenting required permits, protocols, arguments, and of course, committees. The French don't do anything without a committee, even serenity. It started with the Sanitation Bureau, officially called the Service de la Propreté de Paris, which oversaw everything from garbage pickup to snow removal. Around the 1860s, they created a subdivision that managed water dispersal and, eventually, fragrance distribution. Internally, some workers jokingly referred to it as the Ministry of the Odor, the Ministry of Smell. The process was absurdly complex. First, essential oil orders had to be approved by 3 departments: health, finance, and somehow parks and recreation. Each had to sign off on the quantities, blends, and budgets. Once oils were delivered, a separate team diluted them to city-approved concentrations. Any deviation, like adding too much jasmine, could result in a formal reprimand or, hilariously, a citizen complaint claiming the scent was emotionally misleading. Historians still argue whether this level of oversight came from genuine concern or just classic Parisian over-regulation. Probably both. And then there were the route maps. The city was divided into misting zones, each with its own schedule, blend, and pressure level. Some areas required twice daily spraying due to foot traffic, or more bluntly, because they smelled worse. Other streets, particularly near embassies or concert halls, got the VIP treatment: customized scent palettes, flexible misting timings, and an extra half-second of linger on corners. There were debates, fierce, absurd debates, on which streets deserved more rosewater. Minutes from city council meetings reveal arguments like, Madame la Maire, the Rue de la Baie Gréois smells faintly of cheese again. The residents demand neroli. But Rue Oberkampf hasn't had ylang-ylang since Easter. It was part politics, part pettiness,
all deeply French. And of course, this created room for, let's say, perfumed corruption. Rumors swirled about local officials bribing scent crews to accidentally mist their neighborhoods more often. Some claimed mist crews used extra scent near certain cafes in exchange for free drinks. One apocryphal tale involves a magistrate who allegedly paid for custom jasmine bursts during his daily walk to court. The city denied it all. The scent trucks said nothing, but people talked. Even the scent suppliers had their turf wars. Competing fragrance houses lobbied aggressively for city contracts, offering test batches, mock-ups, and highly subjective olfactory surveys. One famous feud erupted when a second-tier supplier accused the top vendor of watering down neroli oil with geranium extract. Scandalous. A citywide investigation followed. No conclusive evidence was found, but the accused perfumer's career was, shall we say, dethroned. And then the paperwork. Oh, the paperwork. Each misting had to be logged, exact time, location, weather conditions, blend ratio, tank volume. The city even mandated that scent crews write a short scent report at the end of each shift. These weren't clinical entries either. Some workers wrote poetic descriptions like, "The bergamot lifted the corner of Rue des Bacs today, like a shy curtain in spring." Others were less inspired. "Sprayed lavender, smelled okay, dog chased us." You chuckle. Bureaucracy rarely smells this good. Yet for all the red tape, the system worked. Streets were misted. People felt seen. The illusion of fragrant order was maintained. And when it didn't work, the people let them know. Letters flooded in when blends changed without notice. One famously dramatic woman wrote, "Dear city, I awoke to citrus when I expected rose. My day unraveled accordingly." Another man claimed an overly spicy blend led to him proposing to the wrong person. The city responded with a voucher for a perfume sampler and a polite request to direct romantic grievances elsewhere. But amid the silly complaints and the perfumed red tape, something else emerged. Pride. Sanitation workers, often dismissed as invisible labor, became scent ambassadors. Children waved at them, florists offered discounts. There were even annual competitions to name the most beloved blend. The winning scent got a special commemorative spritzing across all 20 arrondissements on Bastille Day. You imagine one of these mist crew captains now, cigar in hand, boots polished, tipping his cap at a shopkeeper. His job? Ensuring Paris smells like Paris. No small feat. You step aside as a sanitation cart rattles by. The worker waves. A citrus and basil breeze follows in his wake. You inhale. Yep, definitely citrus, with just the faintest whiff of overregulated nostalgia.
You followed the scented trail through poetry, politics, and perfumers. But now it's time to descend, quite literally, beneath the surface. Because if the perfumed mists were the city's cosmetic layer, the real fight for cleanliness was happening below your feet. Welcome to the Paris sewers, where the scent story gets a little murkier and a whole lot stranger. Now don't flinch, it's not what you think. You imagine a grimy tunnel full of rats and unpleasant wafts. But the Paris sewer system, especially by the late 19th century, was actually an engineering marvel. A subterranean labyrinth of vaulted tunnels, aqueducts, and inspection walkways, so elegant they were once featured in fashion magazines. No joke.
The French even held tours of the sewers, complete with boats and polite signage. You could pay a few francs to cruise under the city while a guide explained how your waste was being transported to the Seine. Romantic in a very niche, very Parisian kind of way. But what does this have to do with perfumed streets? Everything. Because if the city knew that all the scent in the world wouldn't help if the sewers backed up, or worse, belched into the streets during a heat wave. So even as Parisians breathed in jasmine and neroli, the sanitation engineers were underground, working double time to keep the stink monster at bay. Here's where things get interesting. Certain sections of the sewer system were intentionally scented, not to disguise all odors, impossible really, but to disrupt the worst of them. Essential oils were dripped through narrow ventilation shafts or blended with lime water used to flush the tunnels. Historians still argue whether this was actually effective or simply ceremonial, sort of like blessing a battlefield with incense. But records show lavender oil was used in ventilation near churches, and eucalyptus was piped beneath hospitals. In one experimental phase, crews even tested clove oil, believing it had antiseptic properties and might purify both air and sin. And the olfactory war didn't end at the tunnel entrance. Above ground, engineers mapped scent hotspots, problem zones where sewer gases tended to rise. Special grates were installed with built-in oil pans. When the heat caused the metal to expand, it released a slow puff of fragrance. One engineer called it passive resistance against the enemy beneath. You're probably imagining this elaborate system like it's some kind of Willy Wonka sewer fantasy. You're not far off. The Parisians were deeply invested in making their subterranean world as pleasant, or at least as unsmelly, as possible. But the greatest scent experiment underground? That honor goes to a project from 1894, when the city tried to install underground scent fountains. Yes, fountains. Picture ornate bronze dispensers, rigged with gears, slowly releasing misted floral water through ventilation ducts. They hoped the scents would drift upward, like perfumed offerings from the underworld. The problem? Rats. Apparently, the rodents developed an unfortunate fondness for bergamot and congregated near the scent fountains like little Victorian connoisseurs. One letter to the sanitation board read, "While I applaud the efforts to sweeten the Rue Riamour's aroma, I must inform you that your bergamot mechanism has created a rodent salon under my shop." The scent fountains were quietly retired, but the dream never really died. Meanwhile, above ground, the scent teams and the sewer crews rarely interacted. One dealt in roses, the other in rot. Yet both were vital, and both, in their own way, were guardians of the nose. You stroll past a small iron grate in the sidewalk. If you pause and sniff just right, there's still a faint trace of old eucalyptus, softened by time and oxidized metal. It's probably not still active, but the memory lingers. In fact, it's easy to forget just how much of the Parisian scent experience depended on what didn't happen, on the stink that didn't rise. The rosewater wasn't just lovely, it was strategic, a fragrant decoy in the eternal battle of smell versus sewer. And this balance between delight and danger gave rise to one of the city's great metaphors, la surface parfumée, the perfumed surface. Writers used it to describe a false calm, a pretty lie, or a veneer of civility covering something darker. But Parisians didn't fear the metaphor. They embraced it. Life is, after all, often perfumed on the outside and messy underneath. You stop at a street corner. There's a manhole cover beneath your feet, its surface worn smooth by decades of footsteps. Above it, a faint mist of neroli floats in the sunlight. You're standing at the exact point where both layers meet, the floral and the filthy. And somehow the combination feels honest. Paris doesn't pretend it's perfect. It just chooses to smell hopeful. You inhale again. Somewhere, deep below, a rat sighs into a clove-scented dream, and the city breathes with you. You keep walking, and somewhere between the bakery scent and the gutter steam, it hits you. Paris isn't just misting its streets, it's misting its identity. And by the turn of the 20th century, that identity had started to franchise. Yes, really. The city's Perfumed street program became so iconic, so weirdly admired, that other cities wanted in. And so began what Parisians mockingly called the automatic exportation. Let's start with Brussels, close enough to be flattered, far enough to try its own thing. In 1903, the Belgian capital launched its own scented sanitation experiment. Rosewater in the diplomatic quarter, mint water around government offices, and, most absurdly, beer-infused mist in the working-class neighborhoods. Some said it smelled comforting. Others said it smelled like hangover. The experiment lasted 8 months. Vienna, elegant and baroque, approached the idea more delicately. The Austrians added violet water to their horse washing stations, hoping to waft calm into chaotic traffic zones. But a surprise cold snap froze the perfume pipes. When they thawed, they exploded. A bishop was allegedly caught in a splash. He smelled divine for days. Buenos Aires, flush with European ambition, went full send, importing both Parisian misting carts and their operators. The result? A city that smelled like roses on one side and sheer confusion on the other. Locals complained that the lavender distracts the dogs, which might be the most accidentally poetic critique in municipal history. But of all the imitators, none went harder or weirder than Tokyo. In 1910, Tokyo trialed a scent diplomacy initiative after a Japanese diplomat returned from Paris raving about the misty streets. So the city imported orange blossom oil in bulk and assigned geisha-trained scent artists to manage the dispersal. It quickly evolved into a kind of performance art, street misting accompanied by flute music and synchronized fan waves. Effective? Debatable. Memorable? Absolutely. Historians still argue whether these mimicries were serious attempts at civic improvement or just cities trying to copy Parisian chic. But they all faced the same problem. No one could quite capture the original scent culture's soul. Because in Paris, the mist wasn't just a solution, it was a relationship. You see, Paris had spent decades building its scent habits. Mistings were timed to traffic rhythms, seasonal festivals, even emotional patterns. Mondays smelled different from Thursdays. Christmas had its own custom blend. One misting crew famously went rogue and created a heartbreak blend with vetiver and smoke for Valentine's Day. The city fined them. Lovers sent thank you notes. Other cities lacked this nuance. They thought scent was just perfume on the pavement. Paris knew it was narrative. Even New York gave it a go. In 1912, one lower Manhattan neighborhood sprayed peppermint oil near fish markets. The locals loved it. The rats hated it. But one miscalculation, mixing citrus oil with old trolley grease, resulted in the world's first recorded electrical lemon-scented fire, a cautionary tale. Meanwhile, back in Paris, the city began exporting scent consultants, individuals who advised other cities on how to blend local flora, cultural symbolism, and municipal vibes. These were real people with real job titles like urban aromatherapist and civic scent liaison. Imagine turning that in on a resume. You picture one of them now, a wiry man in a velvet vest sniffing the air in a plaza somewhere in Milan. He closes his eyes. Too much basil, he murmurs. Not enough melancholy. And while all this international sniffing was happening, the Parisians remained Parisian, which is to say, mildly smug. They chuckled at Rome's failed rose spritzers. They pitied Berlin's experiments with pine mist. Someone said, "Smells like a haunted church." And they TTSK'd the British, who tried using Earl Grey tea vapor near Parliament, and were surprised when everyone got sleepy. But they weren't entirely wrong to be proud, because Paris had achieved what no other city had. It had turned scent into civic ritual. Just think about it. The morning misting wasn't just tolerated, it was anticipated. There were newspaper columns about it, there were songs about it. Even the city's perfume houses began timing their new releases to align with the seasonal curbside palette. One spring release was literally called La Rivière des Rues. That's marketing genius. And as Paris grew, modernized, and glittered with gas lamps and electric lights, the scented mist stayed. It remained that quiet, dependable gesture, like a goodnight kiss from the city itself. You pause at a crosswalk. The light is red. A misting truck trundles past. You catch a faint note of cinnamon. Unusual, bold, maybe even a mistake. But it fits. Today is colder than usual. You're grateful for the warmth in the air, even if it's just imagined. And somewhere across the world, maybe in a sleepy alley in Kyoto or a sunny plaza in Lisbon, someone else is sniffing the air and thinking, Paris would have done it better.
You're still standing at the sun, lulled by the hush of the water and that faint perfume that refuses to name itself. The air around you is thick with centuries, soft with rituals now so old they've turned invisible. But before the city tucks you into sleep, there's one last breath to take, the future of Parisian scent. Because yes, even the perfumed streets evolved. By the 1920s, modernity was breathing down Paris's neck. Cars, electricity, neon, fast jazz. The scent trucks had to compete with the world moving faster, noisier, and smellier than ever. And for a while, the scented mists faded, almost lost in the fumes. But Parisians are stubborn. They refuse to let go of anything poetic, especially if it smells nice. So in 1932, the city reinstated the misting routes. Not all of them, not every blend, but just enough. Enough to remind people, enough to keep the memory scented. It was more symbolic now than sanitary. The streets were cleaner, thanks to better infrastructure, but the scent, that was soul maintenance. That was tradition. By the 1950s, with the rise of existential cafes and post-war reinvention, new blends emerged. Geranium, to wake the city's optimism. Clary sage to soothe nerves. And an unexpected hit, fig leaf mist, praised for smelling like philosophical breakthroughs and dry croissants. Historians still argue whether these scent revivals were rooted in nostalgia or actual urban planning. But really? Does it matter? If a waft of basil helps a city survive a bad headline, it's worth every drop. Even today, misting lingers. Not everywhere, not always, but in quiet corners, early mornings, on festival nights. A city app even lets you vote for next season's scent. Last winter, roasted chestnut and rainwater won by a landslide. Second place, library dust. You chuckle. And it's not just the city anymore. Citizens contribute. School children design their own fantasy blends in art class. Retirees write scent poems and send them to the sanitation office like gentle demands. Bring back the Rue Claire mint, please. My bones remember it. The city listens. In one arrondissement, a park bench mists lavender at sunset. In another, a metro stairwell breathes cinnamon during rush hour. These aren't grand gestures. They're whispers.
I see you. I sent you. You take one final walk before heading home, past boulangeries shutting down, past lamp-lit doorways and flower boxes hanging like sleepy thoughts. The mist truck passes again, slower this time. You tip your head toward it like greeting an old friend. It hisses. A puff of air, barely there, touches your cheek. It smells like memories you didn't know you had. And suddenly, everything feels stitched together. The rebels, the bureaucrats, the florists, the rats, the lavender and eucalyptus cathedral vent, the geisha-inspired Tokyo spin-offs. It's all part of this odd, beautiful, irrational project. To make a city feel gentle. To make a city feel like someone cares. You reach your street. Familiar stones, familiar scent. You open the gate. The door clicks shut behind you. And even in your dim apartment with creaky wood floors and a suspicious cat, you still feel it. The echo of the mist. You crawl into bed, pull the blanket over your shoulders. The air is still, but your nose swears it catches something. Maybe chamomile? Maybe just the ghost of clove. You smile. Because that's the real magic of Parisian perfumed streets. They don't just scent the city. They scent you.
You're still standing at the Seine, lulled by the hush of the water and that faint perfume that refuses to name itself. The air around you is thick with centuries, soft with rituals now so old they've turned invisible. But before the city tucks you into sleep, there's one last breath to take, the future of Parisian scent. Because yes, even the perfumed streets evolved. By the 1920s, modernity was breathing down Paris's neck. Cars, electricity, neon, fast jazz. The scent trucks had to compete with a world moving faster, noisier, and smellier than ever. And for a while, the scented mists faded, almost lost in the fumes. But Parisians are stubborn. They refuse to let go of anything poetic, especially if it smells nice. So in 1932, the city reinstated the misting routes. Not all of them, not every blend, but just enough. Enough to remind people. Enough to keep the memory scented. It was more symbolic now than sanitary. The streets were cleaner thanks to better infrastructure. But the scent, that was soul maintenance. That was tradition. By the 1950s, with the rise of existential cafes and post-war reinvention, new blends emerged. Geranium to awake the city's optimism, clary sage to soothe nerves, and an unexpected hit, fig leaf mist, praised for smelling like philosophical breakthroughs and dry croissants. Historians still argue whether these scent revivals were rooted in nostalgia or actual urban planning. But really, does it matter? If a waft of basil helps a city survive a bad headline, it's worth every drop. Even today, misting lingers, not everywhere, not always, but in quiet corners, early mornings, on festival nights. A city app even lets you vote for next season's scent. Last winter, roasted chestnut and rainwater won by a landslide. Second place, library dust. You chuckle. And it's not just the city anymore. Citizens contribute. School children design their own fantasy blends in art class. Retirees write scent poems and send them to the sanitation office like gentle demands.
Bring back the Rue Claire mint, please. My bones remember it. The city listens. In one arrondissement, a park bench mists lavender at sunset. In another, a metro stairwell breathes cinnamon during rush hour. These aren't grand gestures, they're whispers. I see you. I scent you. You take one final walk before heading home, past boulangeries shutting down, past lamp-lit doorways and flower boxes hanging like sleepy thoughts. The mist truck passes again, slower this time. You tip your head toward it like greeting an old friend. It hisses. A puff of air, barely there, touches your cheek. It smells like memories you didn't know you had. And suddenly everything feels stitched together. The rebels, the bureaucrats, the florists, the rats, the lavender and eucalyptus cathedral vent, the geisha-inspired Tokyo spin-offs. It's all part of this odd, beautiful, irrational project to make a city feel gentle, to make a city feel like someone cares. You reach your street, familiar stones, familiar scent. You open the gate, the door clicks shut behind you, and even in your dim apartment with creaky wood floors and a suspicious cat, you still feel it. The echo of the mist. You crawl into bed, pull the blanket over your shoulders. The air is still, but your nose swears it catches something. Maybe chamomile, maybe just the ghost of clove. You smile, because that's the real magic of Parisian perfumed streets. They don't just scent the city, they scent you.